Good afternoon and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If I can have your attention, please. Good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to the 2024 IPI World Congress and Media Innovation Festival. And thank you all for making your way and coming here. We are so thrilled that 450 people registered from 68 countries and 5 continents traveled to come to be here with us for the next 2 days. And we invited you to be here with us to explore how we can navigate the crisis of our societies today. Crises such as climate change, economic inequalities, wars, geopolitical conflicts, humanitarian strife, spread of misinformation, polarization, all threaten our societies and global prosperity.
We face. In some cases, it's a pure financial crisis. There's just no business model for journalism. In other cases, it's the threat of technology overtaking the potential for a human-centered journalism. In other cases, it's the blunt force of autocracy renewed against journalism. The threats are many, they multiply, they combine. In many cases, they outshadow us. But it is in forums like these, through networks like the International Press Institute, where we're able to forge connections, to renew our hope in a journalism of hope, a journalism that stands for a better society, for a better world, a journalism that stands for peace and prosperity, for equality and diversity. That is ultimately the journalism that must endure. Because through these many crises that we must navigate, what is essential is that we ensure that a better journalism does emerge. Almost every week, I'm receiving calls from journalists I've worked with around the world telling me that they've either left their jobs, some of them have been dismissed for questioning editorial policies. Many of them just no longer see themselves as journalists when the journalism that is being celebrated today is so different to who they are. And that, for me, is another crisis. Because we have the opportunity, I think, to refresh what we mean by journalism, what we mean by press freedom, especially if we believe that it serves only a few. We must refresh what we mean by solidarity if that solidarity cannot extend to people who do not look like us. And that is essential for journalism, for a healthy ecosystem to survive. There are many, many opportunities among the many crises we face for us to refresh, to renew, but it takes as well an honesty about the failings as well of journalism. The failings as well of our limited solidarity. And certainly, when every time we've heard news of the death, the killing of a journalist, and the first instinct is to ask whether they were a terrorist, we must question about much more than just what journalism is for, but what our limited understanding of what humanity is. Because if our understanding of humanity extends only to people who look like us, then we're never going to get out of this crisis. Instead, we will prolong it. We have the opportunity to ensure that we use these crises to unpick at the philosophical underpinnings of the work that we do so that it emerges stronger, that it emerges a journalism that serves all people, that represents all people. Because the world that we are facing increasingly is a world which will be plagued by information inequality, where only some people will have access to quality information. And this is a product, in some cases, of socio-economic inequality. But in other cases, it's been driven by very malicious forces to ensure that some people will just never be able to understand their world independently. And that is a scary prospect. When we talk here over the next 2 days, what I hope is that we can question as well, what is the way forward? How do we ensure that we persevere amid these trying times, because persevere we must. Every journalist who's called me in tears, questioning the use of this profession, questioning what they're doing, I've tried every time to say, but you have to be there. You have to do this work. We have to do it. Why? Journalism must endure because humanity must endure. Because journalism represents our ability to understand each other in real time. And that is what we risk right now. So I ask all of you, over the next 2 days, as we listen, as we converse, that we try to begin to understand as well how we will leave Sarajevo with the ideas for a better journalism, a journalism that will serve all, and that, importantly as well, will include all. Welcome to this Congress. I can tell you that we're all very excited to have you here, and I hope that you enjoy your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Khadija, for this sobering analysis and the message of hope. If we ever need a proof of the power of journalism, I don't think we could have come to a better place than Sarajevo and this very hotel, because 30 years ago, journalists who lived in this hotel showed us how they could help to stop a war. They risked their lives to bring us every day reports of the horrors faced by the civilians under siege in Sarajevo, of the genocide in Srebrenica, of the mass graves and the concentration camps. These courageous journalists shaped public opinion, which in politicians to act, not only to stop the war, but to establish a special court to prosecute those guilty of the most heinous war crimes. To share their experiences of reporting on the siege from Sarajevo and the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I think to discuss how these lessons can help journalists covering the wars and conflicts today, I'm honored to welcome Michael Montgomery, who, as the Balkans correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, reported from here, but also from other wars in the region. And I think his reporting on the crimes in Kosovo led to the conviction of some of the paramilitaries involved in these crimes. And he's a recipient of multiple awards and accolades for this work. So now I would like to invite Michael, who will introduce his distinguished panel of journalists who have been covering the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Michael, please take the stage.
Hello, can you hear me? Good evening. Dobro večer I dobrodošli. This panel is about the Siege of Sarajevo. We're actually going to talk a bit about the siege itself and covering the siege, and then lessons that apply to today, and of course there's many. Thank you for those opening remarks. I won't give as much context as I wanted to. I know some of you have never been in Sarajevo before. And as we just heard, this hotel was a place where a lot of journalists were stationed. This hotel was built for the Winter Olympics. It was not built for a war. And you'll see a lot of other facilities around Sarajevo that were built for the Olympics. The huge, enormous television building up the road towards the airport was built for the Olympics and became a very important place during the siege. This hotel has relevance to me. I was here during the Olympics as a college student and then here as a journalist. Our panel's going to go back 30 years to talk about the siege, as I said, and some of the things we learned that made us better. Before we do that, I want to say one thing, daring to inject a bit of lightness here. If you were journalists arriving 30 years ago, you wouldn't have arrived in the way you did. You would have come in on a UN flight, which was free, and the name of the airlines unofficially was Maybe Airlines, because they didn't always get here. You would be able to enjoy your descent into Sarajevo, which was a corkscrew, very steep descent, because there were rival armies surrounding the airport. You would get out of the airport. If you were lucky, you would get a ride in a UN armored vehicle. If you were like most journalists, you'd come in a regular car. Your driver would instruct you to open your window, because if you were shot, you were more likely to be hit by shards of glass than the bullet itself. You would drive very quickly into the city on what was known as Sniper's Alley. And if you were staying at the Holiday Inn, you would tear into the garage, gather your belongings, and enter through the rear. You would never come in through the front entrance. Why? Because the front line, the Bosnian Serb positions were 300, 400 meters. If you walk to the river across the main road, you will see high-rise buildings, and that's where the Bosnian Serb positions were. So in the end, though, in spite of those conditions, we were lucky. We were privileged in this hotel. We were taken care of. We had access to food and water, alcohol, that ordinary Bosnians really could only dream of. And we did what we did. We did it on the backs of Bosnian journalists, Bosnian translators. who in some ways were the real journalists here in what they did and the risks they took. On that note, I want to introduce our panel. I don't know if you want to come up and sit down and I can introduce you, or I'll introduce you. First, sitting here is Aida Cercas. Aida. Yes. Aida began working for the Associated Press at the beginning of the Bosnian War. She became an international reporter. In 2017, she joined the OCCRP, Organized Crime and Corruption Project, as a news editor. She has a master's degree in peace research and communications and has been involved in the work of the Center for Investigative Journalism Bosnia since it was founded 20 years ago. To Aida's left, Duška Juričić. Duška was a reporter for Duška Jurišić, izvini. Duška was a reporter for Radio Television Bosnia-Herzegovina during the war from 92 to 95. After completing extensive academic work in the United States, she was editor-in-chief of the news program of federal television and later editor-in-chief of all programs of federal television. She was also general manager of television of Canton Sarajevo. Last year, Duška was appointed Deputy Minister for Human Rights and Refugees of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Next to Duška, Damir Šagul. At the outbreak of the war, Damir was not a journalist. He became a soldier, served in the army of Bosnia-Herzegovina to help defend the city from Serbian national forces who wanted to, if not occupy the city, divide it and create what they dreamed of would be an ethnically pure Sarajevo. In 1996, Damir joined Reuters news agency. A flurry of assignments followed to Albania, Iran, conflicts in Kosovo, Iraq, Lebanon, Afghanistan, Israel, Palestine, including Gaza. Damir lived for nearly a decade in Asia, where he was a Reuters chief photographer in China. In 2018, Damir shared a Pulitzer Prize as part of the Reuters team that covered the Rohingya crisis. Damir returned to Bosnia in 2018 and currently teaches at the University of Sarajevo, and he's also the co-founder and director of the Warm Foundation. John, on the end there, John Danishevsky. John is a vice president for standards, editor-at-large for the Associated Press. Prior to that, John spent more than a decade as AP's international editor and 20 years as a foreign correspondent for the AP and Los Angeles Times. That included covering the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, the end of apartheid in South Africa, the Middle East, wars in Iraq, Rwanda, Afghanistan. John is also a member of many prestigious boards, including the Pulitzer Board, and he is IPI's North America National Committee Chair and Special Representative for Journalist Safety. Okay, so as I said, we're going to start talking a little bit about the siege. I really want to get into that a little bit because it is important for what this city represents, for what this hotel represents. And Aida, I want to start with you. You were a young mother in 1992. Yugoslavia was breaking apart. We've had the war in Croatia. We had all sorts of indications that this place was going to blow up. The Bosnian Serbs had carved out their state, their fascist state, I would say. The ethnic cleansing hadn't quite begun, but there were a lot of signs that something really bad was going to happen. And ironically, the United Nations, in their great wisdom, had chosen Sarajevo as a safe place to conduct peacekeeping operations in Croatia, not realizing, apparently, that this was about to blow up. So the first question for you is, how did you go from whatever you were doing in that moment to decide to become a reporter, or to decide to at least start working for a news organization?
I didn't decide. The war decided. I studied something completely different. I studied German language and literature. I never worked with German. But the war started. I had a little son. He's sitting here in the first row. It's the biggest guy in the whole, in all of these seats. He was a toddler. He was a baby at the time. And I was one of those Sarajevans who denied the trouble that was coming. And I think that is what everybody, almost everybody does before a war. I've seen that in Ukraine, where people just didn't, you know, I spoke to people in Ukraine 2 days before the Russians rolled in, and they were trying to convince me that nothing is going to happen. It's just a military exercise. And I was kind of, I did not want to argue with them. I wasn't angry with them because I recognized myself in them. And it's the denial, you know. Even when it started shooting, we were still denying that this is happening. And that, I guess that's a kind of a defense mechanism. Anyway, you know, I decided, we all went to the basement, and I decided I have to do something about this. I can't just wait for this to go. And there was, in the neighborhood, there was something like a territorial defense, and I reported over there and wanted to become a soldier. Everybody was rolling on the floor, laughing, fine, you know. But, you know, they asked me, what can you do? And can wash clothes, and, you know, I speak languages. So they, oh, yeah, there's this guy over here. He's a liaison officer. And he came to tell us something. We don't understand what he wants. So, okay, I can help. And the guy turns out to be French. I don't speak a word of French. And, but somehow I became the person who would help out when foreigners would come. And then the next day, the next foreigners who came were journalists. And as I was translating, I realized that their job is probably here more important than what any of these guys do. And I joined them.
You know, one thing to point out, a lot of people didn't want to think there was going to be a war here. This is April 1992. I remember, though, April 5th, people did not just believe, they went out and had huge demonstrations for peace against war. So they were willing to, you know, tens of thousands of people right out here in front of the hotel, in front of Parliament. And on April 6th, they were fired on by gunmen from this hotel, because this hotel was the headquarters of the Serbian Democratic Party, the party of the Serbian nationals, Radovan Karadzić's party. And that day of the 6th, those demonstrators stormed this hotel, and the gunmen were apprehended. Karadzić fled to the mountains, and this hotel was closed for a couple of months, and it finally reopened. Duška, were you also one of those people who didn't think the war would happen in the early years? You were already working at radio television.
Sometimes, even now, people, actually almost every day, people ask me, is there going to be the war in Bosnia again because of all these political tensions? And although I'm now a politician, I'm saying, no, it's not going to be the war, but I'm completely wrong address, because I thought that war wouldn't happen in 1990s, and I stayed here. Difference between me and Aida is that I'm a lawyer, but I always wanted to be the journalist. So I didn't know that I would like to be so, but I didn't imagine that I would be war correspondent. And one joke on the very beginning of the war, when Aida became the journalist, she cut her hair very, very short. And she was, since she's a little bit older than I am, we used to meet, and she was very, very hippie, and I loved it. And I wouldn't say that she was my idol, but she was something like that. And her long hair was really, really beautiful. When I saw her, almost bald, I said, well, this is it, the war started. So this is a little bit female point of view. When I realized that, so it wasn't, my husband, that was my partner by that time, we were dreaming in that April about our honeymoon. And the only money which we gathered and saved was meant to be for the Paris, but we spent it for the food and wood because of the lack of electricity. So after the first shots, in the night of 5th April to 6th April, of course, I wanted to come to my work, and it was 10 kilometers from my house. But besides the shelling and sniper fire, I was stunned with the fact that radio television building was almost completely empty. So before the war, 2,400 people used to come and work on radio television of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And of course, my first thought was, okay, people are scared. And probably their bosses told them not to come. But it took us maybe 24 hours of time to find out that many of them actually went to the Serb side.
Left.
They left. And immediately when I noticed that they have already established Serb television and a Serb news agency, that was one of the proofs that there was a hell of a plan of the Siege of Sarajevo and military operation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that is very serious. There was also another story. So these people who went to Pale and who literally betrayed us, left us alone, and didn't tell us anything, what is going to happen. So they said some of the journalists did have the connection with them, and they were telling, be silent, be quiet, everything will be okay, because we will come back in 3 days. And Aida and I were analyzing these thoughts and actually finding out that the plan was to have a blitzkrieg. They thought Sarajevo would be occupied in 3 days, and something like that didn't happen. So about journalism and about television in Bosnia and Herzegovina and the role, we can speak later. But however, for domestic people, for the Bosnians and Herzegovinians who are completely lost, I can say that information, the news was like the food. So it was so strange, completely, what was going on. It was so frightening. They didn't watch CNN. They didn't have the access to Associated Press and Reuters, but they did have the access to their radio, television, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they did have the access to the newspapers Oslobođenje because editors and journalists were on the streets selling the newspaper.
Yes.
And maybe it is too early to say, but I just do not want to forget this. The issue of credibility and integrity of the media based in Sarajevo, and that is radio, television, Bosnia and Herzegovina, newspapers Oslobođenje, and 2 weekly magazines, Slobodna Bosna and Dani, was in the fact that, yes, we were talking about violations, or we were reporting about violations of human rights. We were reporting about war crimes, but as well, after the war, immediately when we recognized that, we were also reporting about war crimes which were done against the Serbs and Croats. And that is enormous difference between the media based in Sarajevo and other local media in Bosnia and Herzegovina on Croat or the Serb side.
Just as a point of note, so for you, those of you not from here, Pale became the Bosnian Serb nationals headquarters up in the mountains. And one of those strange qualities of the war, it was near Mount Jaharina, which was another Olympic venue, which they occupied. So those of us who could go across the lines up to the mountain, you would get the opportunity to interview a future convicted war criminal in an Olympic venue. It was very, very strange. Damir, you were on the front lines. You were not a journalist yet, and you had a certain view or opinion of the journalists coming in with cameras and wanting to get their pictures. What was your feeling about all that as a person defending Sarajevo?
I believe I share what's the rest of Sarajevo population who didn't have any business to do with the foreigners would have to say, and it was awkward, I must say, and I was not very happy to see somebody taking a picture of my mother carrying canisters of water, and that had a great impact, I would say, on my career, looking down the road, and I didn't have any contacts basically with any of the journalists apart from the fact that my father, Mirko Šagolj, was the journalist of Oslobođenje, and one of those guys who were running the newspaper from the basement of Oslobođenje, if you remember.
Yes.
They had those shifts, right? That's when Oslobođenje was officially the best newspaper in the world, right? 1993 or 1992.
And literally the editor-in-chief, you would see him out on Kemal Kuzbayic, you'd see him out on the streets in the morning with the morning edition, selling them. And your father perhaps as well.
No, he was sending me to sell it. me and my brother. So I had my journalism was through Oslobođenje and through my father. And looking, now we are actually thinking about to do something about that Oslobođenje thing. I don't think that happens very often, that you are in a war zone and you have such a good local newspaper, and I think that that fact had influenced the quality of the journalism that came out of Sarajevo in general, including the foreigners, because they had a very, very good local paper, and it is really a miracle. And then I start meeting the foreign journalists. Actually, as a soldier, I worked by the end of the war at the propaganda unit of the Bosnian headquarters, and my job was to pick up some of the journalists and give them access to the front lines. I actually came to your office once in a uniform, and that was.
I had no choice but to let you in.
That was by the end of the war, and this is when I actually realized that the end of the war is coming, and that I need to do something with the fact that my old profession, something that I studied for, had vanished, just as lives vanish.
You had studied engineering in Moscow, is that right? Because your dad was a correspondent.
I studied, and I have a master's in power engineering, but that had vanished just as the half of or the whole country had vanished, the whole industry. So I actually, the journalism was my plan B that I have picked up right after the war in Bosnia, and then I used this vacuum, this empty space, because all big names of journalism moved somewhere else, to Chechnya or to Rwanda. But the Bosnia story was still hot. There's always momentum. The story always carries, with all the mass graves and war crimes, and this is where I jumped in,
So this is in 1996.
That's in 1996.
The siege had been lifted. UN was here, or NATO was here, and that's when you started. And I want to ask you a follow-up, but I want to get to John first and then circle back. So John, you had been to a lot of places in the world, but not Sarajevo, and certainly not Sarajevo under siege. What was it like? I think you came here a few months into the war, maybe summer of '92.
Yeah, I arrived in late May, so about a month or 6 weeks after the war began. And I was going to tell the story about the corkscrewing down. That was
it's fun.
Yeah, it was. You were in these C-3 cargo planes, sort of strapped into the side, and you didn't really have windows. You just had this eerie feeling of twirling around right before you evened out and landed. And then it was, you ran a gauntlet to get into the city. At first, we had just soft cars. At that time, we just called them cars. And I remember the day after I came in, there was a CNN camera woman who was shot through the jaw by a sniper, and that was my experience at Sarajevo. It was already at war. Death was pretty ubiquitous and random. So one of the early stories I wrote was actually about Igor, who's sitting here now, and the fact that Ida told me that when she left him for the day, she always left a note in his backpack about him and asking people to take care of him in case she was killed during the course of the day. And that story really affected me. Sarajevo was a heroic place at that time. It had been expected to be overwhelmed quickly, but and the people here had very little in the way of food or running water or electricity, and somehow they made do by cutting down all the trees in the city to burn firewood. Funerals were held in parks or at a football stadium. People were buried when they were killed, and right out in front of the presidency, I remember seeing bodies lying on the ground after a mortar strike, and it really made you appreciate the importance of being here and trying to tell those stories to the wider world. One of the crazy things were there were Canadian peacekeepers in town, but they weren't really keeping the peace. They were mostly protecting themselves, and they would, they would issue statements. And there was a very good UNHCR officer here to deal with displaced people, but. To go out to where they were in the post office, sort of near the airport, and to get there was really brutal. And over time, the journalists, I would come in on 2 or 3 week tours, and the AP had the style of parachuting people in for short periods, and then coming out. But when you did that, you would see the real heroism of the people living here, and I think Oslobođenje and radio television, Bosnia-Herzegovina were examples of that.
Just one more question about the siege itself. We talk a lot about what we didn't have: no cell phones, really no phones at all, except expensive satellite phones. No social media, none of the tools a lot of us use today for our investigations, no satellite images that were at least offered to us by the CIA. So not a lot of the things we use as basic tools for investigating war crimes. We weren't even talking about the term war crimes at the beginning of the war. But one thing we did have is, it was the pre-digital era, so news organizations had a lot of money back then. My newspaper had a daily circulation of 1.1 million, and that was one of 5 newspapers in London. To any of it, but John, and that for a lot of reasons, but because the money was there, this issue of safety became very relevant. News organizations got armored vehicles. We got flak jackets and helmets, and a much more serious, robust conversation about journalist protection started there. And John, you're deeply involved in that today. Is it fair to say there is it's not the only place, obviously this was discussed, but it does seem like there's a trajectory that goes from Sarajevo to one trajectory that gets us to the trainings that are done now, the conversations that happen at all news organizations, the risk assessments that most of us have to do to put together before any of us go anywhere. Hopefully that applies to people we're working with in the field. But John, is that a fair sort of, was that an important moment?
I and a number of other journalists had been shot during the Romanian Revolution, but it was really in Sarajevo when body armor, armored cars, helmets came into being, and it was really during the Balkan conflicts that people began to question whether it was worth marking your vehicles with TV signs, because you began to feel that that made you more of a target than an ordinary vehicle. And it's gone, you know, if you remember, the 1990s and early 2000s were just almost continuous conflict, small wars around the world, but Bosnia was the place where news organizations really began to armor up, to hire, the networks would hire security consultants. Often former British commandos took those jobs. And not only that, but trauma training became very important, the psychological care of journalists after those years of fighting. You know, it started with Slovenia, then Croatia, then Bosnia happened, which was the worst of them all. And then finally, it ended up with Kosovo, and those wars really, over the course of those wars, the conversations about safety of journalists really changed.
Yeah, and I want to move ahead because we want to leave some time for questions. It's interesting you mentioned Kosovo. So Kosovo was 1999, you know, do the math, 4 years, 3.5 years after the end of the Bosnian War. But by that time, I remember this distinctly, we as reporters were all looking for evidence of war crimes. That whole notion had entered our working lexicon. We had learned from, I mean, Rwanda, Chechnya, a lot of horrible things that happened, but it was very different than in the middle of the Bosnian War, with some notable exceptions of the reporters who went up north and found the Serbian concentration camps. Okay, I want to skip ahead. Damir, I want to go back to you. You've described Bosnia as having an incredible impact for the young reporters who were here. A lot of the people here were young. I want to ask you a double-ended question here. How did the experiences you had here, defending your city under siege, how did it inform the work, your relationship to your subjects in other war zones? People who you were photographing, how did that inform and shape your relationship to your subjects in all the other conflicts you covered?
Yeah, that is a good question, and I'm sure it will apply to many people in this room. The so-called locals, not locals. The fact that it's your story that you're being reported on, and then later on you switch, you go behind the camera, and you become one who reports. You're the one then who pulls the trigger, and obviously that leaves a lot of scars and things that that are not really good. But there's this thing that you had lived, you have been that victim that you are now going to photograph or report. So obviously there's a number of things that you have, or I have in this case, because I came from Sarajevo, from that side, such as probably the most important is the distance. To what distance you go to your subject. What would be the point that you enter or exit its comfort zone. And that's one thing is if you interview somebody about those feelings, and completely other thing is if you had your own feelings. So I really believe that being a part of a big story as a citizen, just one of citizens of Sarajevo, helped me better position myself toward the, if you want, pain of others in the other wars I covered.
I think we probably want to leave about 15 minutes for questions. Yeah. Okay. So briefly, my last question to each one of you, I would like to talk a lot longer. Can you give one relevant example? You've already talked about it a little bit, about how your experiences here in Sarajevo made you a better journalist. Aida?
It made me a journalist. But I can tell you why I became a journalist. Watching what was going on around me, I was just thinking that this has to have some other purpose. This tragedy, if it doesn't push the world a little bit forward in any sense, then it doesn't make any, then it's useless, And I was thinking about the role of journalists who would be coming in, and I found that it is actually the most important role that anybody had, in my view, in a war. Because you have to imagine, if you're in a siege, you're actually a prisoner who cannot go anywhere without electricity, without water, without heating, without anything, without food. But you don't know what you did to deserve that, one thing, and you don't know how long your sentence will be. And and that's actually what interests you the most. That information is more important to you than food. That's why it was so important what local journalists did, because they gave some sense to people of what is happening and why, and how long this is going to last. On the other hand, I was working with foreign journalists, and I felt a certain hatred toward the outside world, because when this started, probably like everybody in Gaza, like everybody in Ukraine, I thought that if people would know what's going on here, they would do something about this. And I thought, if I report what's going on, something is going to happen. It was 2 years later that I realized that I almost wanted to quit, because I realized that I am actually yelling into deaf people's ears. Nothing is happening until somebody told me, a very old man, told me that, yeah, after the Second World War, you know, they asked so many Germans, like, where were you when they took your Jewish friends away and you never saw them again? And they all had the same answer. I didn't know. Well, you know, he said, what you're doing here, it might not stop the war, but you're informing the world, and at least after this war, nobody will be able to say, I didn't know. And I thought, that is probably the mission of my life. I will now inform the world, put the information out there. If they want to read it, they read it. If they don't want to read it, then it's their choice. And I have turned an excuse, oh, we didn't know, an excuse into of an alibi. You know, that's an alibi. I didn't know, so I couldn't do anything about it. Into a choice. It's your choice. You didn't want to know. And I thought, putting that burden on the shoulders of people who are not doing anything about the misery in this world is my life mission.
Thank you.
Was that the question?
No.
Sorry.
Dushka, one thing that you feel made you a stronger person or a stronger journalist, whatever, but through your work.
Generally think about what I think about the war, that is a major waste of lives, health, time. And journalism is very, very different there than comparing with the peace circumstances. And again, I'm going to say one example. Maybe it wouldn't be helpful. So there was once that I left Sarajevo during the war, and we went to CNN in Atlanta, and there were the journalists from all over the world, mostly from the countries which didn't have the experience of the war. And they were talking about a number of international issues, including one which was very, very relevant by that time. That was O.J. Simpson affair. And I really didn't have a clue. What new can I bring to them? What can be my contribution? And I felt a little bit sad how to explain the story, that how you can have a bath with 2 liters of water, because they do have so much water. So I would, of course, you made excellent point about the journalism which we completely forgot, about humanism, about our mission to make a world better. But sometimes we become very embarrassed to even say that because people laugh on us. And that should be, and that's why I'm glad, because the journalism in the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina was different comparing with the others, because there was no distance, there was no balance, there was opinion making, and that was important. That was what mattered.
Thank you. Damir, one thing from your experiences here
that had influence on my career.
That really, in a concrete way,
Yes,
made you who you are, which is an
Yes,
amazing
yes.
photo reporter.
I think it's actually the fact that foreign correspondents exist and what they do. You know, when I start seeing as just a Sarajevan, start seeing the first pictures by Ron Haviv from Bijeljina in 1992, I thought, you know, I'm not going to see a picture like this from a local photographer, certainly not somebody from the Bosnian side, because he wouldn't be next to the Arkan units, nor somebody from the other side. It would have to be somebody, you know, as foreign as Ron Haviv, and then the pictures from northern Bosnia and such on. So I think that's fact that you know, what foreigner can do, you know, it's just unbelievable, and I kept having this thing throughout my life.
And the photos we're talking about were photos that the photojournalist Ron Haviv took in the northeastern town of Bijeljina. This was right before the Siege of Sarajevo, and he was allowed into the town with these notorious Serbian paramilitaries led by a man, former assassin known as Arkan. And he made a set of extraordinary, horrible images of people after they'd been executed. He was able to smuggle that film out. And it certainly, if we didn't know what was coming, that was as good of a sense of what was coming, because that was classic ethnic cleansing, extermination.
Yeah. And that could have been done only by a foreigner.
Right.
By
John?
a foreign correspondent.
Sorry, John?
Well, I think my perspective is a little similar to Aidi's, that we would tell these stories day by day with images and video, and for years it seemed like nothing would happen. But eventually the geopolitics changed, and the United States finally intervened in a more decisive way to help bring about the Dayton Peace Accords. But I think one lesson I learned, or what made me a better journalist, is that even if your stories do not get a cause and effect immediately, that persistence and bearing witness even again and again and again and again and again, if that's what it takes to finally to serve a purpose of making things better. And it's true, people think that journalists have their own interest, but I think most journalists, and especially people who go to places like Sarajevo or Ukraine or Baghdad, they're there because they want to tell the stories of the people. They aren't interested, especially in seeing bodies or anything like that. They're trying to help, and I think my philosophy about that was really shaped by what I experienced and learned here in Sarajevo from great people like these.
Thank you.
Can I just add something?
Please.
I agree with John, but this was my perspective in '94 when nothing was happening. In '95, I do believe that journalists actually changed the world, at least my world. The foreign intervention came that we were dreaming of, and it was a kind of something that I thought will never happen. And then the day it happened, I was aware that partly it was happening also because of me. And it was a day when I was just sitting there and I was numb. You know, like, but yes, we do change the world, and I'm proud of that.
And it wasn't just about NATO. You know, during most of the war, the U.S. And other countries imposed an arms embargo on Bosnia. And it was really only partly because of the government of Iran and certain U.S. diplomats looking the other way that weapons did get here that were very important. Let's go to some questions if we can. Oh, right there.
Here's a microphone.
Oh, great.
Hello. Does it work? Yes.
Yes.
My name is Victoria. Thank you very much for an extremely inspiring and emotional conversation. Just wanted to refer to what Aida mentioned about people's decision and their right to choose or not be informed. And while journalists are often in a bubble and we consume news and produce news increasingly, if you go out of our bubble, you see that more people choose to protect their peace, their mental health, their privacy, their time outside of work, and just not consume anything linked to wars, conflicts. As an Armenian, I know that very well. It was a struggle to make people really read about what was happening back home in 2020 and last year as well. So my question is, considering the way modern conflicts are covered and the tendencies of news consumption, as a journalist, if you covered these conflicts now, what would you change? How would you cover these stories to make sure that more people actually open up to them?
Oh, why me? Okay. If I would be covering it now, I would probably, back then I was obsessed with what the this officials say and what the that officials say and what the UN said. I would have focused really more on the people and on their stories. I'm sorry. I think I did a good job. John?
You did.
You did.
But I think I would have believed people more. You know, there was a situation when a person was telling me about mass executions, and I didn't believe him. It turned out to be true, you know. And I think now with this wisdom, I would have just covered the people. That's all you can do, you know. Unless you find something that people outside of this conflict can identify with, a housewife, a child, or this or that, they really won't bother. And when you said that people choose to not consume news, I think that's mostly because it makes them realize how helpless they are, you know, how small they are, and they watch this and they can't do anything about it. As we now watch, I was the one who was angry with the rest of the world because they didn't do anything about my suffering. I'm sitting now watching Gaza, I'm sitting now watching Kiev, and you know, half of Ukraine being kind of wiped away. I don't know what to do, and it makes me feel terrible. So maybe one of the remedies is just to turn the TV off. I tried that, but it made me feel worse.
Thank you.
I would add that the media platforms have changed, so I think now what would be most important would be to get the information into social media, and I think we've seen that a bit with Gaza. At least in the United States, the college students are all up in arms, and it's not because of what reporters like me are reporting so much, but the sort of the raw footage that they see on social media has outraged a new generation of people in the U.S. So I think social media and the internet have the ability to bring these stories very close to people, and I think it will slowly lead to change there as well.
If I just might add on that front, we were talking about this earlier. I mean, we all know this, that the social media is building block for stories, for investigations, And often our job is to corroborate it or confirm it or geolocate it and with these incredible tools we have. But it still, to me, still comes down to stories. And there's people in this room who do amazing work combining narrative and some of these new tools. And it's to me, overwhelming because it's work I could never do in my lifetime. But it's the story that engages me, the people, and not just the technology.
Based on your immensely impressive experiences, successful actually experiences, what sort of piece of advice you would give to the locals with potential journalistic potentials, locals live in Gaza and Sudan and other conflict zones?
And you mean journalists, people?
The locals who are not now journalists, but they got the potential.
But they're in places like Sudan,
Yeah, what
Gaza.
sort of advice?
What would we advise the locals?
For someone living in these places who's not a journalist, but what could they how could they become a journalist, or how could they become a person who disseminates information relevant to journalism?
Cooperate with journalists. Let them tell your story, because that's the only thing that's going to help you, I think, right?
It's a much more democratic world. I mean, people can report directly with social media. They don't need journalists necessarily if they're able to do that.
We have now, we are seeing this now with Gaza, that some of the most popular journalists are the Gazan journalists, because there are no other journalists. So, I would say just work. Don't. I think I wasted too much time thinking about how I should do things, or should I do things, instead of just doing them. And now ways of communicating. Before, I had to knock on an AP's door, hoping that somebody's going to process my film in order to look at that frame, in order to buy it, for me to appear in the world of media. Right? That's a complicated procedure. And now I'm one click away.
Yeah,
so
charge your phones and report.
Yeah.
But you need to, you also need to monetize that in some way, right?
No, you monetize it by surviving. That's you don't think about money in these situations.
I believe that what I wasn't mentioned, but now you said the monetizing is the thing that is killing a lot in journalism, because the journalist now has to be a businessman too.
Well, right.
So now I have to be a manager and editor in one. That's not good. It's not good if your manager is a chief editor at the same time. Right? So how to monetize? That's not my job. My
I
job
just
is
mean to make a
report.
living or make money. I don't mean to have an investment portfolio. John, did you have something to say?
No, I agree with that the tools that are available to people now, they can go directly to social media, so keep your phone charged and get out there.
I have a question, please.
Please.
Okay, so first of all, I'm Yumna Sayed. I'm a Gazan journalist. I have survived this. And honestly, it was very interesting for me to hear you describe 30 years ago the power of journalism in ending a suffering of a population and a war. And although it was 30 years ago, it had that power to actually expose war crimes, atrocities, and bring an end to a war or a suffering over a nation. But I want to ask today, as senior journalists ahead of us, I want to ask you, how much do you think that the journalism industry has shifted in our days today? Do you think that the journalism industry is still independent enough to report impartially, with integrity, about all kinds of war crimes, all kinds of regions, different conflicts, different kinds of wars? Has it shifted from what it has started to something different now?
May I?
Yes.
Thank you. It shifted,
It has shifted.
and it's embarrassing. And if I'm the journalist of big American or the British company, I would be very much embarrassed because of my war, my own war. I did something, and most of the Sarajevans considered that very, very stupid. I went to Beirut in 2006 during the short war between Hezbollah and Israel. And I was watching building destroyed in half a second of 500 kilos bombs, one bomb of 500 kilo, 1,000, etc. So I don't have the experience as that, but because of my Sarajevo experience, I wanted to go somewhere else and to see how it looks like. Talking about the Gaza, and what John mentioned, that they were thinking, they were confused how to protect themselves. Should they put the signs, etc.? I believe that occupiers, aggressors, criminals taught from the Bosnian War how journalism, how real journalism is important, and how real journalism can contribute to the truth. And unfortunately, comparing it with the Bosnian War, when the journalists were not legitimate target, journalists in Gaza are legitimate target of Israeli army. So that is a difference. Plus comparing with the numbers. So besides of telling the stories and supporting the journalists, because that is the last line of defense for Gaza. The difference between us 30 years ago and now is that I believe that every single citizen of Gaza, every single Palestinian should be the news writer. Report about your stories. Don't be only the numbers. Because we know through our war how people get tired, eating their dinners and listening about wounded people suffering in Gaza. Tell us the stories, because there are so many. There are so many.
I just wanted to say that we didn't have the means that you have now. You can report every day. You just need a mobile phone. And we didn't have that. The Sarajevans really relied on foreign press to tell the story. There was nothing else coming out. But use what you have, because whatever you think is unfair in reporting about your situation, you can counter with social media very effectively. So just do it.
I'm afraid we're going to have to stop here, but I want to continue this conversation later in the reception, but I do not want to step on the next panel because I'm very eager to hear. And I'll be happy to talk about the relationship between reporting and the ultimate decision of NATO to bomb Bosnia, because it's not quite that simple in my opinion. Anyway, thank you, all of you. It's been fascinating and inspiring.
Thank you, Michael, Aida, Dushka, Damir, and John. As we ended this panel on the topic of the moment of the crisis of journalism, of journalist safety in Gaza, where the journalists are killed in the greatest numbers, I think we are ready for the next conversation. And I think it's important maybe to highlight the fact that it was mentioned on this panel that there are no foreign journalists in Gaza. We are relying on the Palestinian journalists to report, to tell us what is going on, and they have persevered. And I think we are honored to have Yumna outside today with us who has made, I would say, superhuman efforts to join us today. We also have with us, joining us live via satellite link, Wael Al-Dadou, who unfortunately wanted to be with us today and couldn't, was prevented from traveling to Sarajevo, but he wanted to be with us. As Wael, welcome. And I think we are honored and thrilled that esteemed journalist Azmat Khan has accepted our invitation to lead this conversation and has traveled all the way from New York to be with us. Azmat's, I think, reporting on civilian casualties of war won her the Pulitzer Prize, and currently Azmat is the director of the Simon and June Lee Center for Global Journalism at Columbia University. And I cannot imagine a better person to tell us about the crisis of this moment than Yumna, Wael, and Azmat. Please welcome.
Thank you so much, Frane. It is such an honor to be here with, exactly as you said, these journalists who are extraordinary profiles and courage, journalists who have risked their lives to bear witness and to tell the stories of what is happening in Gaza right now. It is the most profound reporting that one can do, and it comes at great loss. So I'd please just like to give both Wael and Yumna a big round of applause and thank them for being here tonight. So we're going to be talking about some very dark subjects today. So I wanted to start with a lighter question, if I may, to both of you, to both Wael and Yumna. In so many ways, journalism is a calling to bear witness. It is something that you are called to do. And I wanted to ask for each of you, what was it that called you to journalism? And what does journalism mean for you? So why don't we start with Wael, and then I'd like to turn to Yumna. And there's a translation happening, so we'll just have like a momentary pause between a question.
I cannot hear him, please, just... It was my wish to be among you and to participate and to listen to you and for you to listen to me, but these are the circumstances. In any case, through this channel, I can basically put some light on issues in my life and in my professional life. Indeed, this mission is very difficult, and we are very much basically under huge pressure. Because in any situation we can be in huge danger. And we know that professionals are always professional reporters and newspaper people and reporters. They are trying to convey the picture in to all parts of the world. But in the Gaza Strip, it is the feeling that we always have, that you as a journalist, you can become a news that you are reporting. To become, instead to be to convey the news, to become title in the news. This is what is making life of Palestinian journalists difficult. As you can watch, all Palestinian news people or media people are paying huge price to do their mission. They always try to have that kind of professional approach, to be transparent and to basically follow all the procedures and standards for security, etc. But unfortunately, they turn or they make targets of them, sniper firing or bombarding, and he's paying his life as a price for his mission. But we choose this mission freely, and because we are certain and because we believe deeply that there is a message that we want to convey, and that it is a human mission and it can be a goal in a human life. That's we believe in this mission, and we basically give our full effort, even our blood and even our lives, because millions are waiting from us to convey these news and pictures that we are now basically sending to the world from Gaza, and we are paying the price with our lives, with our with all that we have, and we lose our close friends in that, even our family members, our neighbors, and our cousins. In the end, events are now going inside of Gaza Strip. We were born there, we basically were brought up there, and we became part of that environment. All of them, we treat them as a part of the social structure that is there. The work in Gaza Strip, unfortunately, it is life of the reporters or the news people or the media people. It is not only burdens, but it is also making even that preparation to give you a life on the path. Even in this moment we are talking after more than 8 months, the war is ongoing and the attack is ongoing. This is our profession in Gaza. Despite of all of that, we will continue to do our work professionally, and this gives us a strength.
Thank you. And Yumna, what brought you to journalism?
So I actually graduated from the translations and languages and translation faculty, and that was in Cairo University. So journalism wasn't really a component of my educational background. But as soon as I moved to the Gaza Strip in the 2014, this territory, it was a very interesting territory for me as someone who was living out of the Gaza Strip my entire life. It's a place that I did not hear a lot about. I did not know a lot about. It was a place that was under an ongoing Israeli siege, but it had amazing stories of the people there. But the people there were not really heard. No one knew anything about them. I did not feel that there was a lot of coverage, international journalists being able to enter the Gaza Strip, to speak about the Gaza Strip, the people of the Gaza Strip, this territory. It was mainly spoken about when there is a conflict, there is a war, there is an escalation. So it's basically just covered those bloody events. But the beautiful stories of life of the people of Gaza, that part or that reflection of life was never even brought. And that was my first motivation to pursue my dream, which like journalism was a dream, it was a passion for me. But then I've always believed that journalism is actually reflecting and being the voice of people who don't have the privilege to speak about themselves to the entire world. You do that for them. And this was my main motivation in Gaza.
Yeah. That's actually the motto of the network for which both of you and YL report, Al Jazeera. This voice of the voiceless is often espoused as its central mission. And I want to turn to some of the recent news that has happened to Al Jazeera with the banning of it by Israel and the seizing of equipment and shutting down of bureaus. Can you talk a little bit about what has happened and what it means in the context of press freedom?
Well, what has happened, everyone has seen what has happened. It's not something that has been hidden. It's basically very clear how it is being tackled, how it's being addressed. That is a legal matter. But yes, this is another fight against the freedom of speech. And this just shows basically how much the suppression of the freedom of speech is being practiced by Israel. And it's very clear that this has happened with Al Jazeera, but just several days later, almost a week later, the AP was also, or the live feed for the AP was also disrupted. So this is also another attack on the freedom of speech. For over 8 months now of this ongoing genocide, no international journalist was allowed freely, independently, to enter the Gaza Strip and to cover this war from the events from the beginning. So we've always said, we know as Palestinian journalists living in Gaza, we know the nature of this. We know the nature of the Israeli government and how it deals with us as Palestinian journalists, as a Palestinian population. But what the international world has not been aware of, or maybe was aware but chose at some times to ignore or disbelieve, is that there is a true suppression of freedom of speech, and it has been practiced on you as international journalists, as international organizations, journalism organizations, and you have not been able to do anything about it. And it not just stop there. It has gone to the point of banning an international network like Al Jazeera from doing its work, and then going to the AP and disrupting its live feed. And it's going to continue because it starts with one step, but it does not end there. As long as there is no action in return to all that suppression, it will go on, and it will escalate, and it will fire back on the international journalism organizations.
Thank you. Wael, you have suffered extraordinary losses, profound losses. The journalists of Gaza, more than 100 of them, and media workers have been killed, primarily in Israeli airstrikes. You have lost family members, you've lost colleagues, journalists have been arrested and detained. They have been working under extraordinarily dire conditions, hunger, lack of sleep, lack of electricity. In the previous panel, people were talking about, well, the journalists of Gaza now have cell phones. They also have blackouts. They also have lack of electricity. They also have enormous obstacles. Even if they're able to get coverage out on the internet, they can get shadow banned or censored, something that we have seen in real time. These are extraordinary challenges, the likes of which I don't think we've seen. But Wael, I want to ask you, you have suffered extraordinary losses. We spoke earlier about whether he was comfortable sharing this, but Wael, I want you to tell the audience here a little bit about what it was like to be reporting and to lose your wife and your son and your daughter in an airstrike, and then to keep reporting and survive an airstrike that killed one of your colleagues, and to keep reporting and learn that Hamza, one of your sons who is a journalist, was killed while he was reporting in January. Hamza, what can you tell us about working through these losses?
What can we say? probably a human being cannot express himself. This pain that is there. What does it mean to have your family as target? I cannot hear him, unfortunately. We can be killed in any moment because we are doing human mission, and we know that there is a certain nature of this occupational forces, and they will take news people and media people for target. But we were a little bit surprised. Why do they target our families? And occupation choose to have that approach. It is very harsh and very painful approach when you have people seeing their families torn to pieces. Why should my wife pay a price because of the profession of her husband? And my daughter, Sham, she was 6 years old. She paid with her life profession of her father. Mahmoud, my son, who was preparing himself to be the journalist who is able to speak in English language, why he was killed in this shelling and bombing of the family. All of my family were killed in the house, and cousins. Even my grandson, in the first month of his life, also lost his life. My brothers' children also lost their families. And tens of them were also injured, and they were also under the possibility to be killed. Why? Because I work as a journalist, and my mission is to be professional. And we do not try nothing else except to be professional. We do not put things out of the frame. We do not make facts as we want. We are basically conveying what is happening on the ground. What does it mean to be there? And there was organization, and Israeli forces approved our visit there. And then in Khan Yunis, they took our crew as a target. And all of our movements were under surveillance of drones that are and they can basically read even the details of what is happening on the ground. They were over our heads, and we were basically targeted by rockets. 3 of people from the civil defense were killed, and my colleague Sami was also, and I was also injured, and I'm now under treatment. Even my colleague Samir was injured. He was not killed. But the Israeli army refused ambulances or prevent ambulances to come and take care of him. We found out that when we took his body, Marta Samir, when he took that he was targeted once again when he basically removed his bulletproof vest, and he tried to basically search for shelter, but he was targeted second time with a rocket that killed him, and his body was torn by that rocket, and his camera will also became, and we have some part of his equipment became part of his body from the strength of this hit, and he was basically in the mission, and Israeli approval was there, and they know that we are there, not only for journalists. And after that, I have my son Hamza. He was also video recording some of the houses that have been torn in an airstrike. He was coming back from his mission, and he was killed. and his body was also totally burned in the explosion. And also 2 other journalists were also injured. So there is intention in that targeting. This is not easy, this is painful, not easy for anybody. Any human being, when you pay that kind of price, but in the end, from the beginning until now, we know that this war will be difficult and it will cost us a lot. But nevertheless, we will continue to do our obligation and to do our duty. And this is what I want every time. It was always painful to go back to camera and in front of lenses. And I understood there that Israel is basically putting challenge in front of me, something that is unprecedented. Are you going to go back? But you need to continue and to be on the level of that challenge. I will go back with lenses, camera lenses, and I will not change. My message or my mission will be what it was always. Even the way in which I will report, sentences that I will use, the messages that I will send, nature of covering of these, it will be. That was the highest challenge. I think we as journalists, we succeeded in this. Despite of all difficulties, more than 150 were killed. They paid their lives as a price for this human mission. But unfortunately, it is ongoing. This is what is painful. We are paying this price, and painful and difficult, but what is the alternative? Should we sit or go outside of the scene? Is this going to guarantee that we will be more secure in Gaza? There is no secure place in Gaza. No hospital, no mosque, no place. Even the tents are not secure place for people that are now basically giving shelter to tens of thousands of people. There is no other choice for us. That's why this is our choice, to continue our work and to convey these messages, this humanitarian and human mission that we have. And we thought that we were protected by international law, but unfortunately, there was no protection for journalists in Gaza. That's why we paid such a price. Yeah. Probably in all wars that even wars that have been ongoing for years, you do not have this number of journalists. 150 to be killed in such a short time. This is devastating and I want to convey this to you. This is something that it is more than the humans can bear, but God Almighty is giving us this strength and giving us this patience and capability to basically take these pains, take these difficulties, and to understand that our mission is more, and there is importance in conveying the messages to millions of people all over the world who are waiting to know what is happening in Gaza, that is under the siege and under the war. There is no journalist except Palestinian journalists who are working day and night to give the voices to those who do not have voices. This is what gave us patience. Additionally, and this is also significant and important, those also families of journalists, they do not understand what is the war, essentially. But their lives also, they became victims. They also gave sacrifice. They miss us. in the most important moments of their lives. They need us, and we are not there for them. But when they paid their life as price, my daughter, she paid in order for her father to perform his mission. It is a disgrace, and this is not acceptable to go from this path. They paid that price. We will remain on that path that we have been doing this. We will never accept to go astray from this path. This motivated us. Even after they were killed, we need to respect their sacrifice, and we will continue to give our sacrifice on the path of our profession. And we know that we have give significant contribution to the world in order to know what is happening to us and what is happening in Gaza.
Thank you. It really is extraordinary. While the day after his family was killed, you could see him at a funeral for his loved ones, and then he continued reporting on. The days after his colleague was killed, you saw him wearing a press vest at a funeral for him, even though he was injured, and he continued to report. After his son Hamza was killed, he said, Male, she said, it roughly translates to, it's okay. And he continued to do this journalism, even though he is injured and getting medical treatment. And that is one example among so many journalists who have paid extraordinary prices from their families, from,
Can I just say something about this? It's not really that Palestinian journalists are not human enough, or they're extraordinary human, or don't have that, amount of feeling or like soft hearts inside. We just don't have that privilege of breaking down.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have that privilege. At the beginning of this war, one day, I got back home. It was before the evacuation, the first evacuation. And I had returned from Shifa hospital and everything that I had seen there. And that same day, I was actually going to get killed in Jabalia refugee camp by a missile that hit the area where I was. And I got really hurt, and it was like, I don't know what happened, but a miracle happened, and I escaped that targeting. But it was just too much, a lot of emotions, a lot of exhaustion, mental and physical exhaustion. And then I was in my room that night, and I was crying. I put my hands on my face, and I cried so hard. And my 8-year-old, Serene, she just turned 9 last March. She came in, and she was very quiet. She held my hand, she removed them from my face, and she told me, Mommy, you can't break down. You can't be weak, because if you are weak, we see everything black around us, and we can't survive. And I felt like I was shocked by her words, that she's only 8, and she spoke like she was 18. And I felt like I have a much stronger and important responsibility not to break down, because if I do break down, these vulnerable souls that depend on you as a parent won't have any hope to continue surviving. So this was one fact as parents, and the other, many other factors, is that if we did break down and surrender and give up and feel tired and exhausted and just, like a normal human being, just decided that we can't do it anymore? Who's going to continue covering the story? Who's going to continue speaking about it, about the suffering, the ongoing suffering, the days that get worse and worse every day? So it wasn't just a professional duty that kept us going, and because we are heartless or we're iron people. No, it was the reality that we felt that we were abandoned, and that pain and that reality that we felt as journalists, that we have been abandoned. We did not want our kids to feel that same feeling by us, and we wanted the world to continue knowing about what's happening, because we still had hope, and we still do have hope, even after all this time, that this will come to an end, because we are still ongoing, and we are still talking about it.
It was Barry Malone, who I think is deputy editor-in-chief of the Thomson Reuters Foundation, who'd said that, the journalists of Gaza, they wear pressed vests, they lay pressed vests on coffins, they wear them to funerals. They're so proud of their profession, and they honor it, and this commitment that they've made personally, that they've had to do. And yet the world is silent about what is happening to them. Can you talk a little bit about the journalist community's response that you've seen and where they are failing?
For several months, and I'm speaking among a lot of journalists now, and this is very important because for many months, me and my colleagues inside the Gaza Strip, we wondered, where are the journalists of the world? What is happening? Sometimes we even asked ourselves, do they have internet disruption or communication like we have in the Gaza Strip? What is happening? Did something happen to the world outside that they are not even talking about us? We felt for many months that we have been abandoned by the international journalists. We realize, and every single journalist realizes, the power of journalism. Whether you are a reporter who speaks or you are a writer, you have that power in your words, in your pen, in your pictures as a photojournalist. But that power was not put in the right effort, with the right effort when it came to covering the Gaza Strip. Why didn't we find that strong fight, that strong stance by international journalists for the right to enter the Gaza Strip, to cover the war? Why did you abandon that right? What happened to the freedom of speech? What happened to the international organizations, those very strong international journalistic bodies? We did not see those journalistic bodies or international organizations come together and condemn the reality that they are not allowed to enter as journalists to cover this war. We were disappointed by the silence. And you had the power as a journalist. You have that power. But you did not use it. You did not use it, or you just neglected to use it. The fact that journalism, or the integrity of journalism, should be practiced despite all agendas, despite all races, despite any other reason. It should be practiced because it is journalism. It should be practiced everywhere, in every place of the world, not on a story against another. That strong effort that we had seen, the strong condemnation when Ukrainian journalists were killed. We needed to see that. and the number of journalists that was killed in Gaza, it's an unprecedented anywhere in this world. How can you be so quiet about it? Not one show spoke live about the reality of journalists being prevented from entering Gaza. Not one federation of journalism came out to say, we condemn and we ask for our right to enter the Gaza Strip and to support our colleagues. No help, no equipment was sent to the journalists of the Gaza Strip, who from the very first week of the war, all our media offices were destroyed. We had to work from tents. We had to be displaced from place to another. We wrote our scripts on our phones. We filmed with our phone cameras. We did our interviews on the phone. We did everything we could to continue the flow of information from the Gaza Strip. But at the end, we heard there is a lack of information coming from the Gaza Strip. That is your mistake, not ours. You can't blame us. You can't blame us for not fighting for your right to enter the Gaza Strip. There is no lack of information coming from the Gaza Strip from day one and until now. Journalists have paid the price of their own lives for you to get that information. Even speaking about the fact that social media and people are getting the information from social media, well, it's your job as a journalist to verify those videos of the social media, to speak to your people about them. I want you to ask yourself one question. How long do you think this genocide would have taken to end if from day one international journalists and Western journalists entered the Gaza Strip, covered this war as it is, unbiased to one story against the other, without using the misconception of terms, of words, and definitions in describing what had happened, and delivering all this news to the people, to their people. When you're a French journalist and you speak to your people in France, you're an American journalist and you speak to your audience in the States, you're a British journalist, you speak to your audience in the UK, how much faster could this genocide have ended, and how many lives could have been saved? Silence is also complicity. Silence is complicity. And the silence is terrifying that we are witnessing. It's the silence of it's the silence of journalists, it's the silence of governments, it's the silence of almost everyone. Lately, it's the people who are speaking, but it took us 8 months of suffering for the people to realize what we are going through and to speak and to support and to condemn what is happening in Gaza. It's a very heavy price that the people of Gaza have paid. Do not forget that over 35,000 people have been killed already. 70% of them are children and women. They are not Palestinian fighters. They are children and women.
It was incredibly powerful. And, you know, I hope that there are editors in this room and others who are having those conversations in newsrooms and really trying to take this mantle up. It is so important. And thank you for sharing what you just did. I know we're running close on time, so I want to ask one last question to each of you. I want you to tell me about the beauty of Gaza. Tell me about what you see. We talk so much about the killing and the lives, you know, those who are essentially suffering right now, but tell me about the lives they live and the joy, and tell me about the beauty of Gaza. Let's start with Wael, and then we'll return to you, Yumna.
To talk about Gaza, it is difficult, especially in these circumstances. But Gaza is life. It is basically full with life, with people, with children, youth, women, elders. And you find capacities, you find educated people. They like joy, they like to make joy. This is Gaza. There is a strong will. Despite all the years of blockade and siege, more than 20 years, 30 years, Gaza was not safe, never. Wars, uprisings. But probably this is what gave people in Gaza that strength, that is iron strength, that capability to continue. Every time they impose war on us, we have mortars, we have victims, we have people killed. But from the first moment, the life does not stop. When the shelling stops, then life comes back. Even those who lose their houses and their flats and their families, they are trying to heal each other in order to go back to the life. This is Gaza. It is full with joy, full of beautiful stories and success. All of these issues were present. All places in the world, you have societies. Currently more than 2,300,000. Most of them are young people. They like life. They love life. Never you will say that they like to die or that they want to build life. They are experts in building life. They are not experts in... Probably these circumstances imposed on them certain response. But this is the story of Gaza. All people in Gaza, they have their families, they have their children, youth. People get married there. They build their houses. They struggle in their life. Despite circumstances, they are looking for opportunities, and there are no opportunities due to the blockade and occupation. In this war, it is basically the death brought to Gaza. Even under all of these circumstances, the blood that is shed and what happened with almost all parts of Gaza. Issue of refugees in Gaza. I think that this is what is basically present. That is death that is following people and trying to take them. But they do not surrender to that. Even if they lose their family members, they continue with life. They are building life. We are living in the tents. We saw people trying to bring joy to their children with things that are very simple. Mother trying to sing to her children, to give her emotions, beautiful national songs, to tell them the stories. Even they sometimes invent things to basically celebrate birthday of a person in the family. Not because of the birthday, but because of the joy that they want to bring hope to people, to have life in the jaws of death, to have life. It is catastrophical. It is not life. We have massacres all over Gaza. But life is there. People are not surrendering, even in the tents, in the refugee camps. They want to build life. You find even life that is there. We were sometimes doing our mission and our occupation. Sometimes there is no food, no drink, there is no toilet, there is nothing. Essential things in life that are human needs. Women, youth, where do they go in these areas? But you find them, they find something. What is present, what is available. If something is not available, then we will find something, even if it is almost impossible. They try to make the most from what is available, to make life for them, for their families, and they know in any moment that they can be bombarded or targeted by airplane strikes, air strikes. They leave some of the places. They go to other places under shelling, but they continue. They are looking for life from Gaza to Deir Balah, in Khan Yunus, in Rafah. Then they go back to the middle of Gaza. Now you have people moving from Rafah. Despite of that, you find them very much full of hope and full of life. This is Gaza. It was that, and this is what we can convey to you. This is the story when a human being loses most of the member of his family and his house for 10, 15, 20 years, or for generations. His father and grandfather were there. He loses this house. And he built his family. And he loses them in one moment because it was shelled, bombed. He says, God is enough for us. We are ready to make this sacrifice. This is something that is not present in many nations. This is in Gaza. This is heroic approach of the people in Gaza. In the very, very cold nights with rain, and he is bringing small bread to his family. And then the mother is basically dividing his. We see that. We sometimes do not find even the bread to stay alive. But this is Gaza. People are in solidarity, even elders. They are giving us example that gives us motive to be persistent, to be patient. This is Gaza. In short, Gaza is life, and life is Gaza, despite issue of death from all sides.
And Yumna?
So I think that basically the main power or secret about Gaza is the steadfastness of the people of Gaza. They are a nation that has been deprived of all legitimate rights for years. The basic necessities, you know, just like you would meet someone in Gaza who is 50 years old and he's never traveled once in his life. He's never gone out of that border. And for me, as someone, honestly, like before the 2014, when I came to Gaza, it was like, what? You've never left? You've never traveled? That was like something that I felt was like really strange. Not even to Egypt, which is like 20 meters borders between both the Gaza Strip and Egypt. Even that, they have been deprived of. But yet, the Gazan population or the Palestinians in Gaza, it's always been the very little things that they have made or found happiness in. You know, You will find very ambitious people in Gaza. The population itself, this is the nature of the people of Gaza. They're very ambitious. They're very full of opportunities, but they don't just have that chance. You know, they haven't been put to be able to practice that, you know, being able to travel, being able to try new things, being able to explore like other people in the world. But you will find the best doctors in the Gaza Strip. You will find doctors who, and other international delegations, doctors that have come to the Gaza Strip in this war, they have spoken about the amazing opportunities of doctors and their success in saving the lives and working with very little equipment and medical equipment that they have. But you will find the steadfastness. What makes them the best doctors is the steadfastness. They will try, they will make it happen with the least that they have. And this is also the population. They will be happy, they will bring out happiness from the least that they have. You will see boys swinging on the cables of electricity that never feed electricity and laughing and smiling and laughing really from their hearts with happiness. Even at this difficult time where they have very little food, very little water, they're like surrounded with bombardments, but they will look for that opportunity to laugh from their life, from their hearts, you know, enjoy their lives in that little moment. So it's there, there is a love of life, and they cherish life. And this is very important. This is a very important factor. Do not think that Palestinians do not cherish life. They do, but they do have a very strong faith that keeps them going, that even if we do lose these loved ones, we will have to continue, because it's just, this is our fate, and we just have to go on with it. So it's their steadfastness and it's their faith that still brings their ability to go on with life like normal people in the world. So even in this war, for many times, we sat together, me, Wael, and the other journalists in our tent right there in the street, and we tried to make jokes about anything. In these very horrific times, we tried to find something to make us laugh, because that laughter was the only thing that kept us going along everything else that was ongoing.
Yumna, Wael, the world owes you and the journalists of Gaza a debt that it can never repay. The work that you've done is extraordinary. The coverage that we've had will serve as a record for history. And I hope that you take solace in the contributions that both of you have made and that your people have made. Let's please all give them a huge round of applause.
I just want to say one last thing, please. Maybe me, Wael, and many of our other colleagues who have come out of Gaza, we have been struggling with the survival guilt that we have been living every day, that we survived and our colleagues either didn't or weren't able to come out. But maybe getting out there and speaking about Gaza and speaking about the suffering of Gaza to the people around the world, this is the only thing that is making us survive this survival guilt. But it's not over. It's far away from over. This ongoing slaughter is still ongoing
the indiscriminate bombardments are still ongoing. And it's not enough to just condemn it and speak about it in conferences and talk about it in meetings. We need a concrete action. We need the power, every single person who has a power to do something to stop this ongoing killing machine on the people, on the civilians. They must put that into action. Because honestly, the people of Gaza, they deserve that. They have been abandoned for years, and they deserve that you would stand with them now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yumna, Vail, and Azmat for setting the scene and for making us think for the next 2 days how we move forward and how we deal with the issue that I think you, Yumna, and Aida talked about, that silence is complicity. And I thank you for your courage and dedication to journalism, and you're an inspiration to us all. I think we can continue this discussion over the reception and over the next 2 days, and I would like to invite you to continue talking with us and engaging on how do we help and how do we make sure that the journalists in Gaza are not abandoned. Thank you very much, and I would like to invite you to the reception.